I don't think there's such a thing as a favorite building because they're all, part of a genre of work that is more about thinking about what's possible. So what I really enjoyed is the kind of interpretation of site and program, and the ability, I think, of two architects to work together in co-producing something rather than singular authorship. That's kind of a consistent thread. And then the way that they've dealt with constraints, where they see all the constraints as a possibility for building a creative work. And then also the other thing that I find really interesting in reflecting on it is, how this work has survived. It's over 30 years old, and it's quite difficult to talk about timeless architecture, but this is contemporaneous now. And when Adèle and Tony talk about the work, there's a complete resonance. It's absolutely credible in terms of the experiences of what we've seen and how we've been on site. The one at Iona, it's the site, the narrowness, and a lot of it's regulatory constraints. But sometimes it's the poetic of a site like this, a setback, or how light filters in, how they orient. And then quite often it's a sectional constraint, and how in very small parcels of space they manage through an architectural party to organize quite an interesting building. The Scott Road apartments, that invention of the scissor staircase and tightening that all in, they're kind of like human bodies, I think, interesting anthropology. Well, I would repeat this thing about co-production. So one is between the two of them, and then today he spoke about working with a landscape architect, and then at the previous one with Canty and Templar. It's a real engineer and architect working together. And today, with the star architect kind of syndrome, everybody wants to be an author, want to be famous, but actually you get much better work when you work in a horizon of interconnectivity. So it's interesting, that's kind of the landscape of practice, is working towards that now. People are talking about it, but that's what they were doing 30 years ago. So, from what we see and how work was produced, there's a very interesting case study of people who worked at an incredibly interesting time to produce actually some of the most profound work it's got real, international global significance.